And we're live. Happy Thursday, everyone. Hope you've been having a great week. We've got one guest here that I've been following along online, learning as I go about what criminology is, how Arweave might be able to help, and how to make the most kick-ass AI-centric promotional videos this side of planet Earth. And so we have the one, the only Scott. And how do I pronounce your last name? Jacques?
It comes in all kinds of ways. Jacques, 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 I hear
Okay.
them all. So
All
whatever,
right. Yeah. No, I
dealer's
remember
choice.
every single one of those. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you here. Would you mind giving us like the sort of like 90-second like who are you? Like what's your day job? What's your passions? That just sort of like your general life story, and then we can kind of go into the details of that.
The short story is criminology professor at Georgia State University, which is in Atlanta. I grew up in Georgia originally. The way I got into this job is I was in college at UGA. I found out that like people can just like write articles and interview drug dealers and stuff like that, and like that's their job. I was like, that's an easy job. So I wound up going down that path to academia and I did my PhD in St. Louis. I spent a couple years and a couple summers in Amsterdam, then was in Cincinnati for a couple years, and then I had the chance to come home and now I live in Atlanta metro, very called Fayetteville. It's kind of like it's technically suburban, but feels very rural. I'm out here on 8 acres, very quiet, very peaceful. Um, my day job is research, teaching, and service, which is extremely vague. My real passion on what I'm getting into in any given day, and I do it in all three capacities, research, teaching, and service, is open criminology. Oh, you can't see my air quotes, open criminology, um, which is just I'm really trying to increase the quantity, the quality, the usage of open access to criminology outputs, articles, books, data, code, lectures, whatever, any kind of output that someone like me could make it open access so it's not only free, but also reusable. You can expand on it, you can change it up, remix it, etc.
Okay. Super helpful. Atlanta in the house. ATL. For so most of the people watching this probably right now probably familiar with like the crypto, the Arweave side of it, but criminology not so much, and myself included. Help me out here. Criminology is understanding what about crime?
So that's a good question, and people will give you different answers, and it's changed over, 100 so years or whatever. It's a fairly new field relative to, mathematics and stuff like that, or even psychology. I think of it as the study of crime, and this is paraphrasing a classic scholar in our field. It's the study of crime, or excuse me, lawmaking, law breaking, and reacting to those. So anything where you're looking at why was created, or how it was created, or the effects of the law, including on crime or not committing crime, and also like neighborhood prevention or like what parents do. It's a very broad scope of you can really fit in anything if you're starting to really get into like ethics and what people should do and shouldn't do, and then when does it cross over that legal boundary. Um, there's some
At
dis
the risk of sounding dumb, is there ever one of the like CSI kind of shows you get compared to? Because like I am literally in my head going, okay, so he's not CSI Miami, he's not CSI Las Vegas. Oh, he's Criminal Minds. Oh, I remember that,
yeah.
but not exactly. But that was the first thing that popped in my head.
So what's interesting is like criminology has these fake barriers, of course, right? Like all fields do. You need to draw lines. And one line I was going to talk about is whether criminology has to be science or not. And I would say not, because like the history of crime and law is very interesting, I think relevant. And then another question is, does it include law as in like jurisprudence, like what the law should be, like what you would find in a law school traditionally? And does it include forensic science? And I imagine most of my colleagues would tell you no. I think it should, and I think the field has actually suffered, I mean, possibly quite a bit, certainly a little, and I think a lot more than that, by not being the CSIs, the like criminologists, generally speaking, and is somewhat of an overstatement, and I tend to make overstatements, is don't really know much about the law usually. Like if you came to us for legal advice, we'd be like, no idea. You should probably talk to a lawyer.
And you think that's a bad thing?
I think it's a
Or
bad thing. Yeah, definitely. There's certain things like, I mean, maybe just as an example, one of the things I became interested in early on is whether drug dealers call the cops when they're victimized. And criminology's very hard, simple answer was no, of course not, because drug dealing is illegal. And one of my papers, and I learned this over time from talking to people, when drug dealers get victimized, they do call the cops sometimes. There's a fair amount of examples of this. And so it's just like you would only understand that though if you kind of understand what the law is and you're going out and talking to people and these kinds of things. So definitely a lack of the other thing is criminology is supposed to be interdisciplinary. Like, so it's not a field of study, or it's not a discipline in the sense of psychology or sociology have a very specific way that you're supposed to approach problems. Whereas criminology is supposed to be like bring anything to the table to understand the topics I was just talking about. So to rule out, what the law actually is, and according to legal standards, what it could be, or how to actually like collect prints and understand chemistry, just doesn't make sense to me.
okay, very interesting, very very interesting. And I think I read while looking up on this, just so I wouldn't be completely dumb, that you described yourself as a utilitarian scientist. Did I just completely make that up out of thin air?
No, I have considered that for a while, and what that means is just like what are we doing here, and like how are you guiding your decisions, and something we might wind up talking about later, just like looking at the agenda, but I'll say some things on it now, is a lot of what criminologists do just like makes sense in our little bubble, but it doesn't make sense as soon as you step outside it. And I think just having some kind of framework of, okay, I'm not simply trying to maximize my pay and get more prestigious positions, but I'm trying to serve the greater good and think very seriously about what that means helps orient me to the job.
Very cool, very very cool. And like, what's sort of like one last question about criminology, just because it's not a topic that comes up a lot on this show. Well, like, what's are there any misconceptions out there that like about crime research that will lead to sort of like I don't know any misconceptions at all, and any misconceptions that have had like adverse effects when it comes to like how people think about policy, how people think about making laws.
Oof. That's a very big question that I will not really answer, but the short answer is there's all kinds of misconceptions about, people usually feel like crime is getting worse, even when crime is going down.
Yeah,
Um, and the thing I will say about the research is I think it's healthy to be very skeptical of how much we actually know. Just in the sense of I'm kind of a poo-pooer on people will be like, oh, well, it's a peer-reviewed research article. Like, I've been through the system long enough to know that being peer-reviewed might mean extremely little. And it's kind of like everything is up for question every time you ask the question. And I don't think we've accumulated a lot of great insights that I think, we could definitely build on and move forward with without any kind of reservation.
makes
That's
sense.
interesting that peer reviewing, because there's a lot of concepts that you could say are even branches of that, like even decentralization itself, like DAOs, for example, are basically people peer reviewing and agreeing on what they want to do. So it's really interesting to hear from a more like I don't want to say mainstream perspective, but from a more common perspective that's not Web3, that you still deal with that issue of like, oh yeah, you have a bunch of people agreeing or disagreeing on this, and that doesn't necessarily make it okay. I've seen that myself, like with DAOs, everybody will not necessarily vote the right way as far as like what's best for that. So that's an interesting concept that I mean, my dad actually talked about that a lot, how like just peer reviews can be messed with a little bit depending on the situation. So it's interesting to hear that in more of a like a mainstream situation outside of Web3 where we constantly talk about that stuff.
And just to give you an example, I would say DAOs and what you're talking about is probably better than what I'm talking about in the sense of how it works is you'll write your paper And then this is how it traditionally works, okay? This is a system I came up in. I got my PhD in 2005, I think so. No, 2008. And the system I was born into, which was a very interesting time to come into because it was like right when things started becoming digitized. Like I remember getting my first decision letter in like the postal mail in an envelope and opening it. If you come around nowadays, that's never happening, right? Um, but how it'll work is you send your manuscript in and it'll come back to you with reviews. But the only people who want, there might be one review, there might be five reviews, right? You have no idea who they are. And supposedly that's good for people telling the truth. I think there's a lack of accountability because you can write a crummy review. You can be a jerk in your review. Like, you can do a lot of things that you wouldn't do if you had to put your name on it. And then the editor makes a decision on that, and that system will go over and over again. And that small circle will kind of know what's going on. Sometimes editors will send the reviews to all the other reviewers, but taken for granted, it's usually going to be the author and the editor going back about what other people said and what the editor thinks too. But once that happens, anyone outside that, like the actual readers, will never know what the reviewer said, right? They'll never know what problems were addressed or weren't addressed. Anything that like would give you insight into like how to actually interpret how this final thing came to be accepted as peer reviewed, I need to bring in my air quotes, is just not part of the public record. And so like one of the things, I mean, going a little into open criminology, one of the things you would want with open science more broadly is making those reviews public where, okay, here's what I think of a paper and I'm going to publish that. I'm going to make it public and you could make it public without your name on it or with your name on it. And I think it's better to put your name on it, but at least make it public and tie it via the metadata to the articles themselves so that people can more easily come in and understand what people are thinking about it. Because right now, how it works more so is there's some critical thinking up front, and then it's peer reviewed, and then people just go, oh, it's peer reviewed. It must be fine. It's not fine.
This is a perfect segue into like, so open criminology is that the same thing as, and I don't know how to pronounce this, CrimRxiv?
Thank you. I was hoping I could have the opportunity to explain where that came from because I did not make
Yes.
that up.
Okay, where'd it come
So
from?
in the sciences, some of our listeners will have heard of archive, Arxiv, which I believe is at Cornell, and that was the first repository of its type, to my knowledge, that was essentially you can go in and whether a paper has been peer reviewed or not, submitted to a journal or not, you can go in and if you're a physicist or mathematician, and you can go ahead and publish your paper, make it public right away for free and open access. And so they came up, the notion of a field specific or discipline specific repository um, has since been referred to as this kind of archive. And the
Ah,
way you'll see it spelled is either ARXIV, RXIV, or sometimes you'll just see the XIV. So if you go to like various archives of this type, you'll see the, just kind of what sounds best or goes with the letters in front of it. And so CrimRxiv is a open access hub and repository for mostly articles in our field, although if people want to, they can publish other things. It's kind of like the special thing on the menu. You got to know to ask. Um, and that's what we do. So people submit to us, we publish it, we put a DOI, it gets out into Google Scholar, and they can either do that before it's been accepted at a journal or after. And then we also, one of the unique things about CrimRxiv is I've always considered it a hub. And what I mean by that, and there's repositories like this, like in economics, there's REPAC, where what they're doing is they're also centralizing data or centralizing outputs. And so we have, for instance, members in our consortium, and every time there's a new open access paper, let's say on someone's website or in the journal, or reports will come out from government agencies. If it's part of that group, they're the member, we'll add it to CrimRxiv forum. And so we're also taking in things rather than just kind of being reactive on submissions.
Okay, I'm seeing the full picture here. So you were coming up in a traditional peer-reviewed setting, and it sounds like you experienced firsthand the downsides to sort of the traditional model. One, anonymity, and then two, I'm imagining like access. Like, don't you have to pay for most like peer-reviewed
Oh
things?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
So it's
so
like, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
most criminology, so there's really two layers of what we can call like closed access.
Uh,
And one, and I just need to stop doing the air quotes, apologies. Um, One layer is like, do you publish it at all? And so in science, this is known as the file drawer effect. So if you don't get significant results statistically, generally speaking, those are often handled with just putting them away on the idea, putting them, not ever trying to get them published, on the idea that null results are usually harder to get published. And this is a well-known phenomenon among scientists. Then later, if you're trying to do meta-analyses and there's not significant, there's null results that just were never published, you can imagine how that messes up your meta-analysis. So
mm-hmm.
one is if you do a study, if you do a scientific or contribution or another type here in history or whatever, I'm not sure it would matter as much. You should put that out in the world so people can make use of it later. Like, to me, that's utilitarian. It doesn't make sense to like put all this time and effort into something and then put it away and never publish it. Now, why might you do that? Oh, well, it'll lower my credibility because it's not that good, or oh, it's a waste of time because it won't get published. But the thing is, with the digital age, you can publish it right away. So 20, 30 years ago, you had to go through a publisher. And I can understand you have limited time as a scholar. You want to make the most of you can, and why send something that's not going to get published? Nowadays, if you decide, you know what, this paper isn't worth putting more time into, but I stand by the results and I want people to see them, you go to a site like CrimRxiv and you publish it. I think you should do that with all papers, but it's just to say that kind of barrier isn't there. So there's that, just the closed access in the sense of remains private, unpublished, file drawered. And then there's closed access in the sense of, at a minimum, like you need an email address to sign up. But most people think of closed access as you have to pay, or someone has to pay. And so libraries might have subscription access. You as a member of a society may have subscription access. And I have to imagine this is extremely rare, you pay $40 per article. Like, what's weird about Gen AI, making my stupid videos, is Gen AI somehow knows that the price of an article is $40, because if I try to make a video about it, I don't tell it how much these paywalled articles are, and it comes up with it. So like, it's a wild, like, it's just kind of this random number they put on, and my guess honestly is it's high enough where people don't think about buying it, because big publishers make their money off subscriptions. But in any case, most of criminology research and the social sciences are worse at this than the hard sciences by far. And criminology is worse at it than, let's say, psychology. But most criminology articles are closed access. So if you want to read them, you need to go via your library usually. And there's other routes, but like in terms of a mass way to read things, most people, I don't think it's unrealistic to say 99% plus of people in the world do not have access to the majority of criminology articles. Like, that just seems true.
Mm-hmm.
How I got into this is a little side thing. I'm not sure what to. There's in anyone's life course, you wind up having a lot of streams that bring you into a river eventually. But the one thing that came to mind for this, again, trying to be utilitarian about it, was I was the author of a journal, and it was published by Sage, which is one of the big publishers. And I like the people at Sage a lot. I mean, they're in a business. I don't poo-poo on Sage, right, or anything like that. But they were paying me to edit this journal $5,000 a year, and there were other perks. And to me, in the academic context, because we get paid well for what we do, but it's not like we're making a huge amount of money, $5,000 just seemed like it didn't make any sense. It was way too high. And the way I eventually interpreted that was, if they're paying me this much and they're paying all these editors this much, they must just be making obscene amounts of money. And if you know anything about big publishers, they are. Now, who's paying for that? Who's paying for that is not just individuals, but the institutions. And people say, oh, well, institutions can afford it. Well, who's paying for the institutions? Students with tuition and at a public school like me, taxpayers. And
Mhm.
so the idea that students' money and taxpayers' money is just going into these overpriced articles, like they don't need to be that much, right?
Mm.
Not to publish them, right? Because of, again, the digital technologies we have and stuff. It just seemed kind of like, yeah, I mean, it feels wrong. It doesn't make sense. Um, and that's one of the lingering feelings I had. And um, I would say somewhat this journey has been like, I'm baptized Catholic, so it's like, paying penance and like trying to make up for like, okay, I made that money. It's time to like, offset it in my,
Yeah.
universal bank account or whatever you want to call it.
Your karma bank account. I
Yes,
gotcha.
exactly.
So I'm following you so far. I'm curious how Arweave came into it because normally most people I feel like would think that and go, okay, I'm just gonna make a regular website, and then you proceed to take it an even step further.
That is where the Arweave journey began, and I'm all about Arweave. And the backstory to that is CrimRxiv is on a publishing platform called PubPub. And the PubPub people are amazing. Like PubPub, like just from a like infrastructure standpoint, without PubPub, I'm doing something else right now. I don't know what that thing is, but it's not this. Um, and the reason for that is they made a very good publishing platform freely available and did a lot to support CrimRxiv. There as like the quick side story, like they're a spinoff of MIT Media Lab and MIT Press. Like they were just great, great people, great platform, and I'm all about them. And then last summer, or this summer 25, whatever we're referring to that now, they sent out an email saying that they're going to have to sunset at the end of 2026. And so it's like at that point, what do you do? Um, and I am not particularly interested in going to like the quote unquote competitors. I've had a good run at this. Like I chose PubPub because I didn't especially like the alternatives. Like not that there's anything wrong with them. They're very good and they have an important place in the system. They just weren't for me, right? Um, and so I knew that. And so then what I started looking at is okay, if I die, and this is how I've always approached CrimRxiv, if I die, how can I feel confident that the stuff that I've done still exists? Um, and like Manchester is like the institutional lead of CrimRxiv, University of Manchester, and shout out to them. They do an amazing job. Um, if Manchester just like can't support it anymore or whatever, right? This is just the nature of reality. How can I feel and I'm dead. How can I feel confident that what we've done today isn't just lost? And of course, I don't have to tell the people on this, about Rotlink and stuff like this, like it's a real problem. And I was already interested in Web3. I came to Web3 as an art collector and then found out about the ridiculousness of NFTs, which was hilarious. I loved it. I really miss the heyday of NFTs. I always described it as like imagine that Beanie Babies are gonna just be ridiculously valued, and all you got to do is make sure you get out of Beanie Babies before they dump. Like
Yes.
it was such a clear game. So, anyways, not to go on that. I love that, and I really loved I was part of some communities, and I liked the communities a lot. Like it was a different type of thing. It was fun. I enjoyed the art and the stupidity of it. I love stupidity. I'm all about it. I can really get engaged in that. Um, and from there, I learned about things. So I've always tried to be thinking about how I can bring CrimRxiv into Web3. I did a little bit with Research Hub, which is Brian Armstrong's like kind of a pet project of his, which has Research Coin. I was like the editor of the Criminology Hub on there. Um, and the models in Web3, so getting into decentralized science, DeSci, is what it mostly looks like is alternative funding mechanisms. Okay, like what is DeSci in practice? Alternative funding mechanisms, and to a lesser extent, trying to set up, like I didn't see a strong emphasis on like decentralized compute. Okay, like they're kind of trying to work together, but to me, the big stream, and it'd be interesting if, if you can comment on this for other people watching, like you disagree. Basically, DeSci to me looks like an alternative way to fund. And that's great, but it just wasn't that attractive to me. Like, I thought, okay, I can launch a Crim coin, but like, it wasn't necessary. It was going to be more of a distraction than anything, right? Um, and you have to remember, like criminologists, I mean, another thing about criminologists is very few of us know about Web3 and blockchain and crypto, and it's just not a thing, right? It's not a thing at all. So getting, and they're more still reserved about it or dismissive. So it'd be a distraction. In any case, fast forward. So PubPub's going out, and I was on the golf course. This was in the summer, and I had a long conversation with Perplexity about, okay, PubPub's going away. What are my Web3 storage options? And what do they really do? Because what I didn't want to do was move to Web3, but it's really centralized storage called Web3. Like
Dog and
that
pony
doesn't
show.
do anything. And so, like Filecoin, from the conversation I learned, and this thread is somewhere on Twitter. I put it on our drive. Shout out to the REO guys, and put it on our drive and posted about it, just like kind of for the public record, and had a conversation because I already knew about Filecoin, and from talking about Filecoin with, I was like, this is not what I need, right? I'd rather not do it. And it led me to Arweave and some other things, and it just, the more I talked to it, Arweave was like, okay, this is really promising. And then I just like totally went down that rabbit hole of Arweave and just like got super reading about it all the time, and watching a bunch of Sam podcasts, and watching a bunch of Phil podcasts, and like all of these things just to learn about it. And I feel pretty confident that, as the founder of CrimRxiv, I feel pretty confident that it's the best solution out there for CrimRxiv to exist, even if no one's taking care of it. And the idea being that one day someone else can pick it up and take care of it. Like, I'm really big on the open source model of knowledge should not just be allowed to be controlled by, a journal, for instance, will be controlled by a society. And if you want to take that journal elsewhere, you can't, right? The journals will be owned by publishers. You can't take it elsewhere. And so something I explored a little bit years ago, and I won't go into it, but I had already been thinking a lot about, you need a way to fork these things, right? So if I'm not doing a good job, or Manchester's not doing a good job, people can be like, I can do a better job than that, and I'm making CrimRxiv, and I'm going to spell it right so people know what it is. I'm like, damn, all right, but good. And so that's what I do own CrimRxiv.com, like AR properly spelled. But in any case, that's how I got here, and just trying to protect it. The REO people were extremely generous. Arweave I worked with the onboard group. Shout out to Chris, was very supportive, was great to work with. I like the people a lot. And they did a lot to they put CrimRxiv on Arweave with an amazing mirror site, and it's fantastic. Very thankful.
Dude, shout out Chris and the REO team and the onboard team. Those guys are amazing. And shout out to you, Scott. What you just said is extraordinarily righteous. Super, super righteous. And I would also note that it is we're feeling very sci-fi, where I asked someone, hey, how'd you hear about Arweave? And it's not like a person told me. It is the AI recommended it to it. I believe that's the first time I've encountered that in the wild, where we have an incredible project building on Arweave, and the genesis of that was in some ways artificial intelligence. Talk about like a sci-fi moment for me personally.
Can I segue into AI?
I would love to. Yeah. What do you think about it?
So another thing about Arweave and AO and all of this kind of stuff is, another passion of mine related is the cost of textbooks. And the cost of textbooks is another like scam. Like, there's no reason for these textbooks to be this much. And there was a day I could imagine 50 years ago that you needed a textbook, like a textbook made a lot of sense.
Mm,
Okay. And they were more reasonably priced by then. There's interesting figures out there, like if you're just at Google, of like, check out the price of textbooks versus inflation.
mm,
And textbooks are just like way above it.
Mm.
But in any case, um, that's been a really interesting problem to me, and I've tried to address that in practical ways. Again, like being utilitarian. And just as a quick rundown, like the price of a textbook, like I could afford my textbooks. A lot of my students at GSU can like literally not afford their textbooks. And that sets them up for not learning or not paying their rent
mm,
or dropping out early,
mm,
failing. There's a lot of negative effects associated with these textbook costs. And the research, I don't think the research on this topic is great. It's not particularly experimental, but I mean, it doesn't take a dummy to imagine that's the effect, and what studies there are can back that up.
mm,
Um, and so, for instance, one of the things I've explored is how do you just like the problem is with textbooks is they do take a lot of time and effort to make. Okay. And in my world, you receive minimal to no credit at a Research One institution for writing a textbook. Okay. So let's say I do put in the work to write a really good open access criminology textbook. My institution, and this is not to criticize it or complain, any institution like mine would basically be like, good job. And that will never get like rewarded like a stupid peer review article. Okay.
Hmm.
So there's no, then again, the utilitarian angle is like, this does not make sense.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, and so, anyways, what we want to do with AI, and shout out to Andy Wheeler, who's one of my closest colleagues, is do stuff like take everything on CrimRxiv and use it where an instructor of whatever topic can go in and be like, I need a textbook on policing, and the AI brings it all together, and it can, let's say, look at what the general textbooks have covered to date and structure the chapters, or the instructor can tell it and bring all this information together and make like really good textbooks that are cutting edge and current and free, right? And adaptable. And then like there's other things I'd love to do one day, like a police officer may want to know what's the best practice in such and such area, right?
Mm.
And so they'll go, let's assume they go to Google Scholar, which is unlikely. They go to a good place and they try to find the answer. Like something like CrimRxiv should exist where they just soak up the information and tell you, like, as of that day, what it
Hmm.
is, and maybe there was a recent study and maybe it wasn't, but you can feel confident that it's bringing that information together. And so the ability to have our data truly on archive, or excuse me, on Arweave, and then do AO on top of it to create these kinds of open outputs, right? Instantly at low cost. Like, who cares if I don't get rewarded if it took me an hour, right? That's a big, I mean, a
Yeah.
textbook will take literally a year, right? Um, and just share it, and all that stuff's very exciting to me. I definitely think AI is the future of getting costs down, getting information spread faster, more comprehensively, doing all of these kinds of things. And the other thing is, I think a lot of my colleagues, and this is a lot of, pretty much all of my criticisms are originally self criticisms. Um, they think too much about, well, I can do that. I have the ability or the time or whatever it may be, the resources to do X, Y, and Z, so I should do it myself. Way more people out in the criminology world do not have that time, the resources, whatever it may be. And this is the best option, I think, there is, the best plausible option that will be soon enough to give them a way to be like, you don't have to have your student try to buy $100 textbook. You can do this instead, and it'll be better.
And it'll be better because the textbook was made what 10 years ago, so you're kind of having to supplement it, and it's expensive. And now you can just be like, whatever today's guidance is, the best instructions, make it today, and it's essentially free.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's what we call the data OS, but we always think of it in terms of apps. Like Sam's big thing is like apps are going away because you can just use AI. XYZ thing to happen. You don't need to go buy an app, but you just make it. And you're basically coming at this from an academic point of view, where it's like whatever the knowledge of students is, you don't need to go to this publisher or that. You just make it on the spot, and it's perfect and it's custom and it's basically free.
Yeah. And then maybe
Very cool.
getting real back to peer review again, like I spent a lot of time with AI, and there are certain things that I know more than it that it could not come up with the answer that I could come up with. But
Mm.
99% of things it will answer better than me, right?
Now,
And go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you ever see a downside to it though? Like, is there any downside in terms of like, okay, yeah.
Of
What
course.
what what are the
Let me say the good thing and then remind me about the downside thing.
okay?
The but so in my world, you'll wait a good 3 months for peer reviews. And like peer reviews are genuinely meant to be like, here's ways that you can improve the manuscript as well. Okay?
Mm.
I mean, AI can provide you better feedback on how to improve your manuscript like instantly,
Yeah.
right? And it can keep doing it over and over again. And so it's just to say, like, experts have a place in the world, but I think we're going to be a lot more focused on creating things um, and collecting data and curation. And we can, like, AI can do the stuff like checking someone's statistics. I don't think it makes a lot of sense anymore, for a human criminologist
Mm.
to do that. Um, the biggest problems with AI, I mean, I really think the biggest problem with AI is stuff that isn't actually true of AI. But I won't go down, misconceptions about what AI does and doesn't do and what it can and can't do. Like, I recently put on CrimRxiv a paper with um, Andy, who I mentioned earlier, and student Josh. Hey, Josh, about like what does perplexity and other models pick up in terms of if you tell it to review something, what does it do? Like, can it make a literature review for you? And what we found is ChatGPT, and the models are getting updated all the time, so maybe this is fixed. ChatGPT just made up all the references. Like they basically just took real things and then just mixed them together. And eventually you force it to be like, okay, well, give me the reference list. And then the reference list is just bogus, right? Like totally made up. And to give you a sense of like how much variation there is, I then gave that to Perplexity and told it to find the problems with like to check it basically. But not only did it check it, it then went on to figure out what it was actually doing. And it was like, well, with this reference that doesn't exist, it looks like they're pulling from this article and this article. And they've just made up like the DOI and these other things. Like that's a vast amount of variation, right? So it's like kind of learning what you can do with it and what you can't do with it and what models are right. And prompting seems less important to me than it was when we were first learning about AI, but prompting, of course, and like all of this kind of stuff. Um, and just being like, yeah, I think this makes experts extremely uncomfortable, but like the AI does know more than us. If you give it a question and it starts raising these questions of like, what am I doing? And I think a lot about these questions, and I think a very understandable common response is to say AI is bad. And I just don't think that's going to be a long run or a long term solution.
AI is just enhanced Google, in my opinion, because it takes the legwork. Like, when you used to write an article and you had to research things, you'd go to Google, you'd search Google. Now you can go to an AI and be like, hey, AI, can you give this back to me in a simplistic format that I understand so I can regurgitate that in an article? In fact, give it to me in something that I can use and then I'll rewrite it. And, of course, you have to fact check it and everything, but that's the way I've always looked at it is in its current thing. Because even like coding is a lot of Googling things because you're trying to look at like, with JavaScript, the rules for it. So but the AI just covers all that ground for you. It does the Googling, it does oh, here's your answer and here's how it works and all that. So that's kind of what I've always thought of it too, is like its current form is very simplistic, even though it feels like it can do a lot.
Like an ironic thing about AI and getting back to the human peer review is people are nowhere near critical enough of peer review research. And what I like about AI is now there's a much more critical eye coming from researchers, not only teachers and others, but anyone, right? But researchers trying to really look and be like, is this right? Because you can't, to a lesser extent, is this AI, but is this right? And just the idea that AI would push us to be more critical of not only AI generated outputs, but also human generated outputs, I think is extremely useful. Like you should be looking at everything this way. It doesn't really matter if AI created or a human created. If something matters to your argument or your program or whatever, you have to go in and manually look it over and make your own decision. There's no other option. And it's always supposed to have been that way, but it has not been that way, it feels like, for a long time, certainly not in my field. As an example, people will reference things they've never read, right? I mean, depending on what you're trying to do, sure. But, humans just making up stuff. I mean, that's the other thing. My colleagues and I have been making up stuff for years. Like we don't need AI for that. So
Yeah, I've
it's
been
just
bullshitting for my whole life.
this
Like, AI,
device
welcome
is
to the
all kinds of
party.
bullshit. So this lens on the world, I think, is ultimately very useful.
Hmm. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. If you do you find that you seem to be pretty open minded in terms of your, we're talking about AI, Web3. Do you feel that academia is are you sort of an outlier within academia, and that you're definitely taking advantage of sort of like the newest and the best options you have technologically speaking, or do you think is this sort of common?
It's really hard to say because we do wind
Yeah.
up in these bubbles. And so like the people I surround and there's also a lot of variation in what we should be doing. Like my PC, my like everyone has their own thing answer is I wind up being surrounded by people who are interested in open access, which itself is pretty rare in criminology, or AI, or whatever it may be. Like that's just kind of who you have this weird gravity and people pull toward each other, right? And that's how I'm here with you right now. And I'm sure there's colleagues like who I like a lot who are extremely smart and hardworking who think open access and AI are totally a waste of time and we should be doing something that I think is totally a waste of time. Um, so it's hard to say. I guess the answer to that is, and this, I mean, this, I'm not sure how to say it. There are winners and losers, and I think open access and AI, people who are involved in it and doing it right, are gonna proliferate, and people who aren't will not proliferate for like rational reasons. Not to
Hmm.
say I'm better, or certainly these things are like normatively better, but just like you can look at how that would happen in terms of more production, better information, cleaner writing, more access, more views, more users, all of these kinds of things, more sites. Like from an evolutionary standpoint, it would be weird to me if open access and AI don't eventually win and become the norm.
Hmm. Hmm. I like what you said too about like it's tough to tell. Your vibe attracts your tribe is a saying I like to use a lot. It's been super enlightening talking to you, Scott. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think would be really useful for people to know?
Probably not. No, I mean, who knows?
Okay.
So I would just like to say I'm on Twitter, not much, but hit me up on Twitter if anyone needs me or email, and I'm here to serve. It's been great being part of this ecosystem. I really appreciate you having me on.
Dude, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for dropping by. I learned just oodles and oodles a bunch. Everyone, check out Scott's Twitter. Check out CrimRxiv, which I now learned how to pronounce. Thanks again, Scott. Appreciate you, man.
Bye, everyone.